Okay, so let's see how we can do this, do the same thing here with the distance formula. Because I have not done that with you yet, have I? Okay. If you didn't follow along with this, you'll just need to pause it. I'll make sure this gets posted here over the weekend, and you can look at it and try to follow along. Okay, let's try the distance formula. Okay, so the distance formula is equal to the square root of the difference of x's squared plus the difference of y's squared. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to figure out how are we going to enter this in our calculator. So once again, we can keep almost everything the same here. We can keep our order of inputs as h1, k1, h2, k2. Okay, so if we think of our distance formula in terms of that, we have h1 minus h2 squared plus k1 minus k2 squared. So here is our equation for the distance. And so as we go through the steps, we're going to follow the same steps. We're going to define. That's F4, number 1. We're going to give it a name. So I'm going to call this DIST to abbreviate for distance. You probably don't want to name something just a letter. It might interfere with something later on if you're plugging letters in. So give it a name that can kind of distinguish. So DIST is what I'm going to name it. And then I want to order my inputs. My inputs are going to be the same as what they were earlier. H1, K1, H2, K2. Okay, so there's my order of inputs. And then my final step is to identify the equation, the calculation that's going to be performed. So I'm going to rewrite this down on the bottom line, even though you'll write it all in one single line on your calculator. Julia?
Where is the t on the calculator?
The t is right here. X, Y, Z, and t are kind of some of the common variables used, so t is up high. All right, so let's look at this equation. The way that we would calculate this is we have to take the square root, and the way the calculator shows square root of, so we set it equal to, and then the square root button is right above the multiplication, so second multiply. And we're going to take these two different groups. So inside this grouping symbol, so we'll have one entire grouping symbol. Inside of it, we're going to take the difference of h's, and we're going to square that. So here's the symbolic notation. So we'll have a second parentheses, and then h1 minus h2, close the parentheses, the caret symbol, and then the 2 for squared. And then we're going to add to this parentheses the difference of y, so k1 minus k2 squared. So if we add, again, parentheses, k1 minus k2, close the parentheses, caret symbol 2. Okay, and now we can close off that entire grouping. So this is our calculation for the distance. And so now when we hit enter, it should say done. It's stored this in our calculators. And so let's say we want to take that set of points once again, the same one from the last page, 5, -3, and 2, 7. And if we want to find the distance between these two, so if this was point A and B, then distance AB, the way that you access it is you can either directly type the word, DIST, or if you go to var length, so second subtraction, our word is distance, or DIST, so here I can just scroll down. You might need to hit the D button to jump to the letter D. And then just type in your points. So 5, -3, followed by 2 and 7. And when you hit enter, you get the square root of 109. Okay. Now, the advantage to having this and knowing how to use it is, let's go back to the problem on the critical analysis worksheet. Okay. On the critical analysis worksheet, there was a problem that said, you guys might have to help me out. So the distance was 3 root 2. You guys remember what the other piece, does anybody have that handy? So the distance was 3 root 2. Let me see, I can go grab it here real quick. All right, so if your distance is 3 root 2, and you have the point 3, negative 2, and then you would still have to identify, if you had the equation y is equal to x minus 5, then what are the coordinates of your other point? X and x minus 5, right? The x and y coordinates. So what we could do is we could actually use this distance formula, this user-defined function, to solve that question. And the way that we would do that is we go to the solve feature of the calculator, F2, hit solve, okay, and we know our function. So we're going to call it distance. We need to access second subtraction, choose distance. We know that the distance of this set of points right here. So I'm just going to put it in order. It doesn't matter which one comes first. So if I say 3, negative 2, and then x, followed by x minus 5. So again, you still would need to understand that the y coordinate is just based on the function. And what do we know this distance has to equal in this problem? 3 root 2. So if we type in 3 and then the square root of 2, close that off. Okay, and now we have our equation entered. When you're using the solver, after you write your equation, you need to tell the calculator what you're solving for. The way you do that is you separate it by a comma, identify the variable you're solving for, close it off. And so once I do that and hit enter, I get my answers x is 6 and 0. Okay, and then you can plug it in here to find the corresponding points. So if x is 0, what's the corresponding y? 0 minus 5. And if x is 6, what's the corresponding y? 6 minus 5. So here would be your two solutions for that. Okay. And it just saves you the time of doing the calculations. You still, again, need to understand the process, but you get the calculations done.